Thank you, Dominic. Hello, everybody. Just want to show you this first. This is my edition. I was delighted to see the Three Clerks included in the current Big Read programme, as it gives me the pleasure of reacquaintance after over 30 years when I succumbed to the temptation of the Folio Society editions of Trollope's novels as a treat to look forward to in the halcyon, remote days of retirement. I always imagine them through the folio illustrations by uh, Patrick Benson. We have the first slide. Charlie making a fair handwritten copy without the series of blots and false spellings and his nerve-wracking examination for a clerk shop in the internal navigation that morning, now watched at home genially by his older fellow lodgers and experienced clerks, Henry Norman and cousin Alaric Tudor. I came to the opening scenes unprepared, whereas reading them today, we have come appropriately from John Caldegate, written two decades later, with scenes in the headquarters of the General Post Office based on Trollope's career there. Its two middle-aged clerks might have known the characters introduced here at the outset of their careers. We've also benefited from the insight of Trollope's posthumously published autobiography, where he reveals that Charlie's experience gives an accurate portrayal of his own at the same age of 19 in the secretary's office in the General Post Office in 1834, over 2 decades before recalling it in The Three Clerks. The time of the novel's action is probably deliberately vague to avoid the author getting into hot water with his employer. Charlie is subjected to his to his author's own recollected procedure before his intimidating superior of making a handwritten copy of an unintelligible text followed by an oral arithmetic test. This was reformed by what one would have supposed to be better organized and fairer public competitive civil service entry examinations open to all, introduced by the time of writing this novel. Despite what we read here, Trollope criticized them, that they encouraged cramming and gave a misleading impression of knowledge and aptitude for the job requirements, not proving such essential qualities as honesty and the characteristics of a gentleman. Charlie, as Trollope says of himself, would have failed the reform entry exam. Despite their not even knowing their multiplication tables, both succeeded in the previous procedure. In Charlie's case, as the test deferred to the following day does not take place, and the legible replacement copy of half a chapter of Gibbons's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, painfully executed over 4 hours the night before, and carried neatly rolled with palpitating heart for resumed interrogation, is ignored after 3 hours' wait, where Trollope in his autobiography was seated at a desk without any further reference to my competency. No one condescended even to look at my beautiful penmanship. For both Anthony and Charlie's entry are really secured through patronage. The author, through the exertions of his mother, contacting her friend, the wife of the secretary of the stamp officer, whose elder brother was assistant secretary in the post office, and their father secretary. She lobbied her father-in-law successfully and communicated the good news of an opening to Trollope's mother in Brussels, where she was nursing Anthony's incurably ill father and elder brother and sister, yet could still visit London on business and support members of the family living there throughout the stressful years of being effectively a single parent, rising in the early hours, as Anthony would imitate, to write for 4 hours before breakfast. A sadder family never was held together. Had she failed to write the novels, I do not know where the roof would have been found. Anthony was summoned to interview in London from Brussels, where he had been working at a school for 6 weeks, learning to be an usher with no pay in return for lessons in French and German, with a view to seeking a commission in the Austrian cavalry regiment. Can you imagine what alternative future might have ensued? Would we be here this evening? Thank God for the civil service. As for Charlie, we read his entry was enabled through the great family friend of the Tudors, Sir Gilbert de Salop. We none of us like to look a gift horse in the mouth. Charlie's father, a clergyman with a moderate living on the Welsh border in Shropshire and many young Tudors to provide for himself, knew that a clerkship in the civil service meant or should mean a respectable maintenance for life, so was only too glad to find one of them provided for. Charlie's first place of work will be situated in the next slide, Somerset House on the banks of the Thames, formerly Queen Henrietta Maria's palace, now an art gallery and ice skating rink, but in the earlier 19th century, a nest of public offices in an area of less fashionable repute than those situated in the neighbourhood of Downing Street, its dull and dark rooms saturated with fog rising from the river, appropriately responsible for internal navigation, dealing with tidal river and canal disputes and tolls, the clerks resembling visiting bargees and so-called navvies, a term of disrepute when the story was written 20 years later for the rough labourers building the railways supplanting the canals. We read in the opening chapters that Henry Norman has also become a clerk owing to his father's financial constraints, unable to bear the expense of both sons at university. So his second son at 19, he has been forced to leave Oxford to face the ordeal by interview with the overbearing chief clerk, Mr. Hardlines, of the Superior Weights and Measures Office, its gentility and distinction rewarded by an extra £10 per annum salary. Next slide. Like heaven, no man can deserve it. But at the end of the examination, he was found to be the least undeserving of the young men then under notice, and soon became a shining light, even in that bright light of spiritualized stars which formed the corps of clerks at the secretary's office at the Weights and Measures. In contrast, the name of the equivalent to Mr. Hardlines in internal navigation is Snape, a vowel different from a game bird snipe, mercilessly bullied and routed by the rough navvies under his management, bound to submit by temperament, and his low evangelical piety turning the other cheek. Trollope is at pains to reassure us that while joining in his peers' torment, Charlie is a fit companion for Henry and the Woodward girls, being a lad of kindly heart, a free, honest, open disposition, was easily malleable. So if he had, like his older cousin Alaric Tudor, followed Henry into Weights and Measures, Charlie would have worked without a groan from 10 to 5. Instead, he rushes headlong into the fray at internal navigation at the fore of habitual idlers, usually threatened once a quarter with dismissal. Unpaid bills because of dissipation in gin and water and tobacco led to letters to Mr. Oldschool, the secretary, from Sir Gilbert of Salop, austere letters from father, and heart-rending appeals from mother. But Trollope recalls from his own experience that Charlie could not rid himself of his companions, nor of his debts, nor yet even of his habits. I was always in trouble, he says in the autobiography, always on the eve of being dismissed, and yet was always striving to show how good a public servant I could become if only a chance were given me. But the chance went the wrong way. I wonder how many young men fall utterly into pieces from being turned loose into London after the same fashion. On the first page, Trollope refers to another fictitious government department, the Circumlocution Office in Dickens's Little Dorrit, which appeared in instalments between December 1855 and June 1857, Trollope having started writing The Three Clerks that February and completing it in August. Its satirical attack on bureaucratic incompetence that had been exposed in the recent Crimean War angered Trollope as a loyal senior civil servant. His antagonism will surface later, and characters and authorial passages will seem to have strayed from Dickens. Next slide, The Penguin Companion. Of course, this Trollope's most Dickensian novel, both in its tone and in its setting. Dickens seems constantly on Trollope's mind. No other work shows how much Dickens exercised the imagination of his age. I was wrong during my first reading to expect a light-hearted romantic comedy as in the scenes at the Woodwards in Hampton, for like Dickens, Trollope will use the novel to attack corruption, anticipating the way we live now. The opening pages are weighed down by a heavy-handed attempt at Dickensian satirical humour, complete with his obsession with wooden legs. One unfortunate candidate, on the failure of all his hopes, had thrown himself into the Thames from the neighbouring boat stairs, and though he had been hooked out uninjured by the man who always attends her with 2 wooden legs, the effect on his parents' minds had been distressing. After 3 years and a salary worth saving, Charlie's parents seek rescue from such a fate by making the journey to London to make, quote, one last effort to save their son, the mother beseeching cousin Alaric with tears running down her cheeks to take him under his special wing. But Alaric is reluctant to threaten the settled habits of living with Henry and their respectability, and already has ambitious schemes, ideas stretching even beyond the limit of the weights and measures, and fully intended to make the very most of himself. He is a year older than the shy and reserved Henry, and self-assured, considers himself more worldly wise, and passed through the entrance examination with ease. Like Antony and other young men in his novels, his father's career had been a failure. An officer in a cavalry regiment, in Austria, I wonder, with a fair fortune which he had squandered. Alaric's mother had died when he was little more than an infant, and father removed himself from his creditors with children and household to Brussels, from where Alaric is sent to a private school in England, is brought home for his sister's wedding to a Belgian banker, and at the age of 16, his father's death, which, like Antony's, did not leave behind him enough of the world's worth to pay for his own burial. His half-pay, of course, died with him, and young Tudor was literally destitute. Rescued by his banker brother-in-law to complete his schooling in England, it was bargained that he should teach English without remuneration and learn German without expense, which he does thoroughly, as Antony taught himself to do. But rather than maintain him, his sister and husband procure him a clerkship in weights and measures, where he befriends and moves in with his colleague Henry Norman. Quote, the 2 young men had been thrown together by circumstances. They worked at the same desks, liked each other's society, and each being alone in the world, thereby not unnaturally came together. Henry earns 3 times Alaric's income, enjoys a comfortable inheritance from an aunt who dies conveniently after his appointment, so can maintain a horse, indulges habitual sport of playing rackets, a kind of badminton, and has his own boat to row up the Thames. Every weekend he retreats from the smoke to the rural suburb near Hampton Court Palace to relax in the company of his first cousins, the Woodwards, a kindly, comely 40-year-old unavailable widow, a detail lodger in my mind, with pretty fat feet, maybe a clue to why Trollope declares her my own chief favourite in the tale, carefully managing to support 3 unmarried daughters, like potential Jane Austen characters. The elder, fittingly named Gertrude, more strikingly beautiful and talented, detested fools, with a sharp wit like Elizabeth Bennet, while Sister Linda has a softness attractive to men. Both are blessed with luxuriant brown hair, so we know from subsequent Trollope heroines the fates will smile on them. We're told that Henry prefers the company of women, and Alaric, his being by no means as handsome a youth as Harry Norman, but there was that in his face which was more expressive and perhaps more attractive, neatly balanced as Linda, compared with her sister. His short-cut hair is light brown, mine as Henry's whiskers. So there's an incentive to withstand Henry the sportsman scoffing at his inferior oarsmanship, to join him on his weekend forays and be taken into the bosom of the family. The third sister, Katie, still only 13, and, plot spoiler, passionate about boating. So, will she be kept back for 19-year-old suitably immature Charlie? Is the story destined to be a budget precursor of 7 Brides for 7 Brothers? I wonder, as the girl's mother, quote, with a taste for reforming reprobates, assiduously weans Charlie from hobbityhood to be tamed into their company. Reading the opening chapter again, I try to recall how much of the detail of the other Clarks' backgrounds will be relevant to the plot. For instance, the description of the high Anglican Oxford movement, quote, Puseistical leanings of Henry, a tempting whiff of Barchester Towers here. Will its concerns re-emerge? What other plot possibilities came into the authorial imagination? It can be no coincidence that Henry Norman shares the Christian name of Antony's brother, who died of tuberculosis in Brussels on the 23rd of December 1834, 7 weeks after Anthony had moved to London and been appointed as junior clerk in the post office on the 4th of November. Some of the events in the novel remind me of his remembering in the autobiography, his habit of daydreaming castles in the air, imaginings of alternative possibilities in his youthful life. It tells us also that he was far from being the doltish, hobbity-hoy delinquent characterized by himself indulgently in the persona of Charlie Tudor in this story. This apparently reduced his seriousness as an author in the eyes of his more pompous critics. His amazing mother, whose output from the age of 50 till her 70s doubled his, made her children read widely and deeply, so he was an autodidact with no discernible formal education, but surely better equipped with knowledge of literature and human behavior in preparation for his writing career. And the pages of thanks to the friendships formed during his 7 years' servitude before escape to surveying an island testify to his sociability. At last, next slide. Trollope used to walk to visit his widowed mother in the suburb of Hadley with his fellow clerk John Tilley and other friends to parties and picnics. Victoria Glendenning, in her biography, tells us that another house where he, like his brother Tom, was always welcome was the Grants. They had moved to Hayes, the stop on the Elizabeth line from Paddington before Heathrow Airport, a long walk for a poor post office clerk. Those happy families in Anthony's early novels, consisting of a devoted, attractive mother always at home, and 2 or 3 adorable girls, the Woodwards and the Three Clerks, Mrs. Dell and her daughters in the small house at Allington, are Anthony's romantic tribute to the Grants. I'd love to know more about the jaunts into southern England he made with 2 friends from the capital calling themselves the Tramps, like H.G. Wells in Kipps and Norman's Wherry on the Thames pre-echoes Jerome K. Jerome's 3 Men in a Boat, young men escaping from their equivalent clerkships, though no sign of my favourite Ham Montmorency as yet. Victoria again. These were his happiest times, he said. They slept rough and terrorised villagers by what he called the loudness of our mirth. They got into scrapes, played practical jokes on farmers, and pretended to be escaped lunatics. Trollope will use some of his own experiences for Norman and Alaric and the sisters in this story, which will resonate with other novels soon afterwards in The Bertrams and later in Phineas Redux. Charlie Tudor will be resurrected in The Small House at Allington, and the last chronicle is Johnny Eames. And I can't mention here, without plot spoiling, another character will be introduced in these passages. It is Trollope's close identity with and fondness for Charlie that provides for me the greatest enjoyment of this book. Many of us tonight have met his ghost in the autobiography, where Trollope portrays himself as shy, occasionally brash, always late for work, blaming his watch for being set 10 minutes after Greenwich Mean Time, and always in debt. As we could expect, in an apologia for his emulating and exceeding his mother's example of hard work and hard-headedness in business to become financially secure and even wealthy from the most unpromising beginnings, much is made of his earlier financial woes and misery as a naive young clerk, vulnerable without adult care. The opening chapter of The Three Clerks often recalls the third of the autobiography. It behoves him that his life should be grave and his pursuits laborious. Yet, as sitting there at his early desk, his eyes already dim with figures, he sees a jaunty dandy saunter round the opposite corner to the council office at 11 o'clock. He cannot but yearn after the pleasures of idleness. The perils and pitfalls are illustrated vividly with recollected incidents that replicate events in the novel, waiting for us now in subsequent chapters. Reluctantly, I must be patient and focus our attention with the authors on the early action concerning Henry and Alaric and the Woodwards. The result, Henry is introduced as, quote, true in his friendships, though considering his age, 21, too slow in making a friend, in contrast with the bolder and less romantic Alaric, indicated in his reaction when Henry confides that he would not dream of touching the proud Queen Gertrude sexually, since he worships her as a goddess. And why not put your arm around a goddess? There's no concealment from the girls of the young men's feelings, and they quickly see how things are likely to turn out. Indeed, the relaxed behaviour between them seems so modern. Mrs. Woodward trusting them and treating her daughters almost as equals, Trollope hints perhaps too much so, not interfering and happy to let romance with suitable suitors take its course, as it does for 3 years, to Gertrude and Henry's presumed engagement. The scenes of domestic harmony, appropriating boisterous Charlie and accommodating the arrival of Mrs. Woodward's maternal uncle, are delicately and delightfully drawn. Trollope's sensitivity to the young lover's awkwardness and confusion, shown in his comment on Linda's wanting to speak to Alaric about Gertrude and Norman's relationship to test the possibility in theirs, while he can't broach his emergent amorous feeling that she senses as he swipes the heads of ferns with his cane. The next slide. It must not be supposed that these thoughts in their plainly developed form passed through Linda's mind. It was not that she thought all this, but that she felt it. Linda would not have allowed herself to think in this way for worlds, but she could not control her feelings. They walked on side by side, perfectly silent for a minute or two, and an ill-natured tear was gathering itself in the corner of Linda's eye. She was afraid to brush it away, for fear Alaric should see her. At bedtime, her attempt to engage her sister in talking about her feelings towards Norman are rebuffed bluntly in her prudent, strong-minded speech, as if she is a Jane Austen character. I should be as wrong to engage myself with Harry as you would be with Alaric, for although Harry has property of his own, while poor Alaric has none, he has a very insufficient income for a married man, and I have no fortune with which to help him. I should consider it wicked in me to make myself a burden to a man while he is yet so young and comparatively so poor. Gertrude turns round and sleeps, while Linda can release her tears to, quote, bedew her pillow. But nothing will prove to be further from their assumptions. Many more tears are soon to be shed, and not by Linda. The tranquillity of the Woodwards' home has been disrupted by an interloper from Dickens, one of his ex-service military men, Captain Cutwater, maternal uncle of Mrs. Woodward, unmarried and childless, unseen for the past decade, so a stranger for the girls, but hoped-for paying lodger to ease the widowed mother's constrained finances. The elderly, bluff, retired naval captain blows in on the scene like a southwesterly gale, with his loud voice and ha-ha-has and insensitivity to gentility and nascent tender feelings. I'm passing over Uncle Bat's protuberant nose and snoring even through a Sunday sermon from his addiction to rum. I think at this stage he's intended to be a comic character, a grist to coziness of the domestic oyster. Professionally speaking, he has somehow missed the military action and rewards of Jane Austen's brothers. His preoccupation with contesting the Admiralty for its failure to recognise and reward his achievements at the end of his career offsets the young clerk's aspirations at the outset of theirs, quote, sure to distinguish themselves and get on in the world. Mrs. Woodward says in answer to his queries about their suitability, irritated with any hint of doubt, especially about her favourite Harry, as she calls Henry, her special friend. The captain more impressed with what he sees as gumption in Alaric, who impresses Linda by sending the old man up, flattering his rage at the Admiralty's injustice towards his 60 years' service. This irritates Harry and makes him pompous in Gertrude's eyes, teasing him for being jealous on their walk in Bushy Park the following day, and Uncle Bat thereby gets in the way of the incipient romance. It seems as though now that this captain has come among us, all our old ways are to be upset. His planned declaration of his devotion to her and marriage proposal are thwarted by the conversation turning into her being annoyed by his annoyance with his mother and Alaric, and her annoyance adding to his. Gertrude's self-assurance is to be broken, though, in a way neither can imagine, following the young men's return the next day, quote, to the customary dullness of another working week. For it's all changed to the status quo at Weights and Measures. Mr. Hardline's zeal will be expressed in print that will set off a furore controversy with the likes of Mr. Oldschool blowing into a heated debate across the civil service that will result in succession promotion, a huge salary increase, and even a knighthood for the senior clerk. Quote, Sir Gregory Hardlines was forced to acknowledge to himself that he was born to a great destiny. He is a caricature of the great apostle of civil service reform, Sir Giles Trevelyan, co-author of a major report on the civil service in 1853, the keystone of the proposed changes being the introduction of competitive examinations in 1855. The novel, published 2 years later, by which time they were securely in place, caused some official offence at the post office, but did Trollope no harm in the long run. He was too efficient and hard-working a servant of the crown. He and Trevelyan later became friends, and later Trevelyan said that after the novel, "We always calls my husband Sir Gregory." Trollope has a great time weighing into the reform's injustices. For instance, the strain and unfairness on experienced older married men with families to support, set against bright young things like Alaric Tudor at a time of rapid innovation and improvement. The next slide, please. The spirit of the age raises from year to year to a higher level the standard of education. The prodigy of 1857, who is now destroying the hopes of the man who was well enough in 1853, will be a dunce to the tyro of 1860. Hardline's promotion upsets the apple cart in the lives of our closest concerns, with knock-on crises from the resultant vacancy in the clerk's office that will drive the narrative and character development. Alaric's shrewd intelligence, mature self-confidence, and tactful ease in relationships, including the flattery seen in his sly wind-up of Uncle Bat, works on Hardline's self-importance and secures him a close secretarial role that puts him in a favourable position for promotion as chief clerk, that in terms of sustained serious effort and colleagues' respect would seem by rights to be due to Harry. But he tries to be philosophical about the expected outcome. Among the very juniors, Alaric was regarded as the star of the office. We may remember this image applied to Henry in the opening chapter, a shining light in that bright gallery of spiritualized stars. There was a dash about him and a quick readiness for any work that came to hand in which perhaps he was not equalled by any of his peers. Then, too, he was the special friend of Sir Gregory. Alaric is as pragmatic as Gertrude was with Linda. He will accept Harry's right to win as being my senior in the office, but were I to be put over your head, it would, in the course of nature, make a division between us, and were it possible that you should forgive it, it will be quite impossible that Gertrude should do so. I value your friendship and that of the Woodwards too highly to risk it. No promotion would compensate to me what I should lose at Hampton, he says, should Harry withdraw his application, as he generously offers. Alaric is the next after Linda to wipe away a tear by the disinterested honesty of his friend's noble declaration of the importance to him of their relationship, and wish for his success as the older and less well-off man for whom promotion must be important. But his assurance that if the other wins the contest, it would not threaten their friendship assuages any doubts Alaric may have about the personal morality of competing with him. Norman must now always remember that it was at his own instigation that he, Alaric, had consented to be a candidate. We see how Alaric can rationalize his conscience, take advantage of his friend's love and integrity, so has no scruple in embroiling him in his irresponsible debt by aiding and abetting an immoral and potentially criminal act of financial corruption. The tone of the novel darkens. With the benefit of big readers' hindsight, we feel we are on the threshold of entering the milieu that will become the world of the way we live now. Alaric and ourselves are taken out of the closets of the clerk's office and the middle-class drawing room into grubby scenes on the murky fringes of the political world of the as yet unborn palaces, and like in Dickens's Hard Times, the near symbolic desolation of the ugly, ravaged landscape of tin mines on the borders of Devon and Cornwall. And don't we know what danger lurks in such a setting? Inspired juxtaposition of text in this year's programme, Dominic. Hardline selects Alaric to represent him on an investigation into the new Mary Jane's mine, partially on Crown property, which, quote, had become exceedingly prosperous, outrageously so in the view of bitterly contesting rivals with accusations of bribery of a local inspector that turn out to be omens for another kind of plot. Next slide, please. Alaric is cultivated by the roguish Undecimus Scot, another variant of the ingenuity of overcoming the vulnerability of being one of too many sons to be financed by their father, clever and unscrupulous, whose one ambition in life was the desire of a good income at the cost of the public. He had an easy way of getting intimate with young men when it suited him, and as easy a way of dropping them afterwards. As he says himself in the pub in answer to another new character plying Alaric with refills of drugged brandy, "True, true, we're all mortal. Many loads and Mary Janes, old friendships and new friendships. While they last, we must make the most we can of them. Buy them cheap and sell them dear. And above all things, get a good percentage. That's a game, Mr. Scott. Keep the ball a-running. That's your maxim." He is a memorable, artful dodger reincarnation who flatters and dupes Oliver Judah. "You are more than a mere clerk, unless you choose to remain so." Who the deuce talks openly of his speculations? With the aid of another Dickensian stock-cupboard low-life villain, Manylodes. All these weird abstract label names, alphabet Précy minus X up in all. Now the priggish workaholic caricature of Fides Neverbend, a grotesque version of Henry Norman's principles set against Alaric's weak amorality. The cardboard examination contestants marshalled by the White Rabbit Jobbles in chapters 8 to 11's dreamlike amalgam of Alice's Wonderland, The Pilgrim's Progress, and Gounod's Faust. Alaric's literal descent into the muddy depths of hell and depravity in the charge of the Mephistophelian Undecimus. "'Twas thus the devil pleaded for the soul of Alaric Tudor. To listen is to be lost." And the doctored bishop's tipple working on his muddled ambition to beat his imagined enemy Neverbend. All so vividly imagined, as playfully created as Katie and Charlie's, quote, "stupendous palaces and glorious gardens laid out on their desert island, where he imagines a Gothic Alhambra for his queen to live in." We see Trollope flexing his writerly muscles. Rereading these chapters, I'm impressed by his command of contrasting emotional registers, his calibration of characters through contrast and interplay through dramatized dialogue, and by speaking through their imagined thoughts, a technique learned from Jane Austen, whom he admired, especially Pride and Prejudice. Henry Norman has already felt, quote, "something like suspicion had crept over him, that his friend has supplanted his place in the Woodward's affections, so he no longer feels genial, kindly, and contented there. He foretells the prestige the investigation will give his rival and its outcome." Next slide, please. "I know your superiority to myself. I know you will be selected to go up over all our heads. I feel all this. And, Alaric, you must not be surprised that to a certain degree it is painful to me to feel it. But by God's help, I will get over it." Alaric was touched, but there was more triumph than sympathy in his heart. Henry also knows a key feature of his friend's character. In following up your high ambition, and I know you have a high ambition, do not allow the end justifies the means because you see that men around you act as though they believed so. "Do I do so? Do I seem to do so?" said Alaric, turning sharply round. "Don't be angry with me, Alaric. Don't think I want to preach. But sometimes I fancy not that you do so, but that your mind is turning that way." Alaric cannot take this advice in a key scene that lingers in the mind as we read its shrewd perception realized in what follows, and so to the sad conclusion of this rich opening section. Henry will perceive that Mephistopheles has succeeded in seducing Faustus with his bait of monetary profit from speculation, might come to concur with Andy's assessment that he's a sharp fellow, certainly in some things, and may do well yet, but he's uncommonly green. Certainly at this time of the tale, Andy's cynical philosophy seems to have taken hold. Harry felt, though he could ill have defined his own feelings, that his friend had used him and was now about to pass him in the struggle of life and then leave him when he could be of no further service. Next slide. With dramatic irony, Sir Gregory pontificates to his acolyte clerks about ambition. To devote every ambition of his mind, every muscle of his body, every hour of his life to the civil service of his country. They should know that their intellects were a sacred pledge entrusted to them for the good of that service, and should use them accordingly. In that spirit, Henry Norman withdraws his application, whereas Alec receives the news of his success with indifference. It was the nature of Tudor's disposition that he never for a moment rested satisfied with the round of the ladder on which he had contrived to place himself. He had no sooner gained a step than he looked upwards to see how the next step was to be achieved. Despite his best efforts to conform with his noble, rational intentions, Norman suffers doubly. There is no consolation for him in the pathos of his suffering in chapter 12, and poor Bessie Woodward has her work cut out in dispensing the Kleenex to her sobbing daughter Gertrude and surrogate son Harry. And so we shall leave them, staring at vacancy. The dignity and sensitivity of this chapter shows already why Trollope will be satisfied that this novel is a good piece of work, and why it will be a critical success, better received than its predecessor, Barchester Towers. Wow the Brownings and Florence, and cause Thackeray to complain that reading it disturbed his after-dinner naps. I have on the next slide some discussion points which I think would apply probably to future sessions. First, about ambition, and the ambitions of the characters at this state and the action could be worth comparing. This is the 6th published novel out of 47. Other sides here, what will reappear and be developed in his later fiction. For instance, in characters enacting Trollope's views on moral and social behaviour. And what is your opinion of Trollope using this story to express his opinions on current politics and public institutions? This will be quite a controversial point later. How does he compare as a satirist with other contemporary writers such as Dickens and Gaskell? And the final slide is a trailer for what we have to come. Thank you.